Good evening and welcome to the Decision 2018 State Senate Candidates Debate, airing uninterrupted and commercial-free on YCN, the Yankee Communications Network. I'm Keith Hanson, the host of WNTK and WUVR's First Look radio program and The Keith Hanson Show. I will serve as moderator for this evening's debate. Tonight's debate features incumbent Republican State Senator Ruth Ward, representing New Hampshire's 8th State Senate District. She'll be facing off against her Democratic challenger, Jenn Alford-Teaster. Last Friday on News Talk 99.7 FM WNTK, I moderated a live commercial-free radio debate between the two candidates who are featured here this evening. You may access a podcast of that debate by visiting the link shown at the bottom of your television screen. This evening's debate, although featuring the same candidates, will feature an entirely different set of questions on a different variety of topics. I'd like to take a moment to explain the structure of this evening's debate and also to highlight the rules that have been previously agreed upon by both candidates. Each candidate will be given 2.5 minutes for their opening statement. We will proceed through as many questions as time permits, each on a different topic that is considered important to voters not only in New Hampshire's 8th State Senate District, but also throughout the entire state of New Hampshire. At the end of the debate and prior to the candidates' closing statements, each candidate will have an opportunity to pose a question of their own to their challenger. That candidate will have 2 minutes to provide their response. We've held 2 coin tosses, the first to determine who will deliver their opening statement first, and the second to determine the order of the closing statements. The results of that coin toss have Jenn Alford-Teaster delivering her opening statement first and her closing statement last. Additionally, it was determined that Jenn Alford-Teaster would have the first question posed to her. Each candidate will have 2.5 minutes to answer each question, and each candidate will be provided 30 seconds rebuttal time as well. Ladies, thank you very much, and a warm welcome to both of you. And before we begin, I want to extend a very, very warm thank you to the Sunapee Middle High School for providing us the building. We're filming in their music room. They were very gracious to offer us the space. So again, thank you very much to the Sunapee Middle High School. All right, we're going to start with Jenn Alford-Teaster. Your opening statement, please. 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you to the Sunapee Middle High School. Thank you to WCNL, and thank you, Keith, for hosting me. And also thank you, Ms. Ward, for being here. I grew up in New Hampshire. I grew up on the seacoast. My mom was a single mom who was married at 15 and had 3 kids before she was 18. She had my brother at 23, and we were very young. My dad left us, and we ended up moving in with my grandmother, who had recently been widowed. And between my mother and my grandmother, they worked minimum wage jobs to put food on the table. So we lived in poverty my entire childhood. And when I turned 18, I had saved $265 working at Wildcat Pizza in Durham and moved to North Carolina with 2 suitcases and a place to stay for 2 weeks. I got a minimum wage job 2 days after arriving there, and I was making $4.35 an hour. I'd been working there about a year, and I'd passed out at work because I couldn't afford to eat every day. And the folks I work for encouraged me to go to college, which I had not previously considered doing because I thought it was something only rich kids did. But in North Carolina, it was $2,000 a semester. So I worked 3 jobs, put myself through my undergraduate degree, got a scholarship to my first master's degree in applied geography, worked at a fire department for a couple of years, routing trucks and doing territory response maps, and then moved home to New Hampshire and got a second master's degree in public health from UNH. I work at Dartmouth College. I work in the Geisel School of Medicine in the Biomedical Data Sciences Division, using maps studying access to healthcare services. And last year, there was a young woman who had dropped her 3-year-old son off at my daughter's daycare and then go work at the Dunkin' Donuts all day. And it made me think of my grandmother, who would get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, work, get all 4 of us kids ready, and then go work at the Burger King all day. And I know how much that daycare costs, and I could not imagine that that woman at the end of the day had a lot for necessities. So I thought, I have a really unique story. I know what it's like to live day to day, and I thought I should run for Senate. So I live in Sutton now with a beautiful daughter, Birdie, and my husband, Jason, and it's been really wonderful to be running for state senate and meeting so many people. I've met thousands of people in the last several months, and I could not be more motivated to drive us across the finish line in a couple weeks. Thank you.
Jennifer, thank you very much. Senator Ward, your opening statement, please. 2.5 minutes.
I'm Ruth Ward. I live in Stoddard, New Hampshire, one of the 2 towns in Cheshire County that belongs to District 8. I grew up in China. I spent early childhood there. My mother we had 4 children at that point. My father was killed when I was barely 8, and the 5th one was on the way. we were out there during the war, so we fled from wherever we were to Peking. And to make a long story short, we were there for a while, and then we went back to Europe on a British military ship that took care of us. So we went from China through and over to Southampton in England, and from there on made our way over to Sweden. I went to school in Sweden. I worked there. And when I was quite young, I decided that I needed a change of scenery. So I applied and I came to the United States as an exchange student, and I worked in the cardiac catheterization lab at the Children's Hospital. That's where I met my first husband. A year later we married, and we had children and raised 3 children. Then when they were sort of teenagers, he died. And I was left with the 3 of them, but fortunately they were quite, they were teenagers and they were on their own pretty much. I had decided that I was going to be a nurse because I wanted to be able to stand on my own 2 feet in case anything happened. So I went to nursing school and worked, and eventually I decided that I used the same skills as I did in nursing to go and take care of District 8. I went to 2 years ago, I ran for the Senate and I won the seat, and I have been enjoying it very much. The accomplishments that I really am very proud of is that we got a full-day kindergarten through, and the 2 things that are very important. We got full-day kindergarten, money for the schools to make the environment safe, and there are other things too, but I'll hit on those later on.
Okay, Senator Ward, thank you very much. All right, the first question goes to you, Jennifer. We're going to start off with voter rights in the state, and we are filming Monday evening. We're going to be airing this tomorrow, Tuesday. So just today, Superior Court Judge Ken Brown issued a preliminary injunction against a controversial voter law known as Senate Bill 3. Pursuant to that ruling, the state is presently and temporarily blocked from using new voter registration forms and affidavits that were created pursuant to Senate Bill 3. The ruling was in favor of the League of Women Voters and the New Hampshire Democratic Party, with Democratic gubernatorial candidate Molly Kelly going on record earlier today stating, and I quote, "I'm pleased that the New Hampshire Superior Court has issued an injunction against Senate Bill 3, which made voting more confusing for many eligible voters." Governor Sununu, meanwhile, said, quote, "Senate Bill 3 is a modest change to our election laws that does nothing more than ensure that all those who register to vote present valid identification." The question to you, Jennifer, first is, do you see a difference between the terms residency and domicile? And do you believe that students who are here solely for the purpose of attending a college or university and who do not have the intention of living in or working in the state upon their graduation possess a fundamental right to participate in the elections, specifically here in the state of New Hampshire? 2.5 minutes for your response.
Senate Bill 3 essentially is a poll tax, which requires that students or anybody who's domiciled here to then have to register that they are residents here. And the way to be able to do that is to register a vehicle or other things that shows you're paying bills here. Essentially what it does is disenfranchise young voters from voting. This hurts not just the Democratic Party, it also hurts Republicans, and it hurts the Libertarian Party and democracy as a whole. Students who come to New Hampshire, come here to live and work and study. I went to college out of state, registered to state. I didn't own a car until I was 26 because I couldn't afford to own a car. But I was committed to North Carolina when I lived there. I worked 3 jobs, I paid taxes, I cared about the infrastructure, I cared about the people that I lived around. So I think that there is I think that the decision today makes sense for New Hampshire because we have several academic institutions here where many people end up staying after they graduate. And one of the issues that we've run into in New Hampshire as well is that we want to make it attractive for young people to stay here. Why would we create legislation that would prevent them from voting in the state that they are considering living in perpetuity? We also cannot say on their behalf what they're going to intend on doing. So to say they come here just for the education is like saying you can predict what they're going to do in the 2 years out, 4 years out. We just don't know. Ideally, they'll stay and work here because we need the workforce. Thank you.
Jennifer, thank you very much. Senator Ward, your response, please. 2.5 minutes.
Okay. Obviously, I'm very disappointed at the judge's decision because I think we have worked so hard to take care of who can actually vote in New Hampshire. And for me, it seems you're really diluting the New Hampshire votes, because if you allow just anybody who happens to come here and register, and they don't even have to register, they can come to the polling, they say that they live in certain places, and I have heard instances where you come and they turn to their fellow who works them and said, "What did you say that address was?" To me, that is not right. I think that the New Hampshire people need to have their voices heard, and they're not going to be heard if you have anybody coming in here and voting and really diluting the New Hampshire vote. I'm very disappointed in the judge's decision, and I really hope that we can work on it to get it back to where we had intended for it to be. And if you just look at who is sponsoring this bill, I think you can easily find out who wants to have additional people coming into New Hampshire and vote. And many of them have also voted in other places at the same time. And I have heard more than one incidence of voter fraud where the people have voted here and they have voted absentee ballot. We need better way of finding out who is voting and who is voting double. And I think with our new electronic devices, we can do that, check that up much better. But I really think that the votes for New Hampshire belongs in New Hampshire, and nobody else should vote here.
Senator Ward, thank you very much. Jennifer, your 30-second rebuttal, if you'd like.
I would just like to reiterate that blocking anybody and disenfranchising voters does not help democracy. If we're speaking solely on college students, they come here, they work here, they participate in the communities, they have a deep invested interest in the context for which they live and work. So this bill, Senate bill, is not healthy or sustaining for democracy. So I disagree with that position. I also disagree with the idea that there are people who are coming here and voting double ballots. I just think that's incorrect. Not only do I think it's incorrect, it's been proven that that is not true.
Jennifer, thank you very much. And Senator Ward, your final rebuttal?
I still stand by what I said before.
Okay. Ladies, thank you very much. Moving on to question number 2. Recently, our state neighbors to the east, west, and south of us, Maine, Vermont, and Massachusetts respectively, have legalized the recreational use of marijuana. And to our north, Canada has legalized recreational pot as well. Despite mounting special interest groups, Governor Sununu has indicated steadfastly that he will not authorize any legislation that seeks to make the recreational use of cannabis legal here in the Granite State. In April of 2018, Colorado Governor John Hickenlooper expressed regret over his state's legalization of marijuana, telling CNN he was not ruling out making marijuana illegal again, as the state's crime rate has been rising since recreational use of the drug was made legal in 2014. Senator Ward, you have the first response to this question. Do you believe that marijuana is a substance that should be legalized for recreational purposes? And if so, how would you reconcile the legalization of one drug in light of an epidemic of another drug that has reached, quote, crisis levels? 2.5 minutes.
We are in the middle of an opioid crisis, and we are trying very hard to come up with ways of preventing people to start on these drugs to begin with, finding a way to get them back off the drugs, long-term treatment plans. And for me to legalize another drug, it is ludicrous at this point. There is evidence of what marijuana will do to the brain of developing children. And to add that and say, you go ahead and use it, that's fine. It has nothing, you'll be just fine. I think it's very wrong. I would not be in favor of legalizing recreational marijuana. On the other hand, I have no problem with cannabis being used for medical purposes, because apparently it does relieve a lot of pain in a very nice way. And I think that I can support that, but I cannot support at this point legalizing marijuana when we are in the middle of a huge opioid and drug use crisis.
Senator Ward, thank you. Jennifer Alford-Teaster, your response, please.
Thank you. Broad-based legalization of marijuana doesn't make sense in New Hampshire right now because of infrastructure issues that basically, for example, I recently learned by meeting with the Bankers Association that if you broadly base legalize marijuana at the state and it's not legalized at the federal level. You have all kinds of issues that arise when you're trying to support, like if you're opening up a dispensary for, say, that the bankers would not be able to provide a mortgage. And there are lots of other legal and constrictive ways in which this would be extremely problematic. I do think that there's room for decriminalization of small amounts to ease the burden on law enforcement. I also, as a public health researcher and somebody who has recently worked to submit a grant to understand the expansion of the therapeutic cannabis program, see that there's potential benefit for the easing of the opioid crisis by providing therapeutic cannabis as an alternative to opioids, particularly with certain chronic diseases. Our particular focus has been on easing cancer pain management and exploring how the availability of therapeutic cannabis could help to alleviate cancer pain and cancer symptoms. I think that there is potential there to reduce the need for opioids post-surgery, but also for chronic diseases with particular individuals that I've seen recently out on the campaign trail who are either experienced chronic back pain. I met a machinist who has had 23 surgeries and he's on low doses of opioids. They don't last him the whole month, and whenever the weather changes, he experiences extreme pain. So there is an opportunity here to further study and explore how therapeutic cannabis can be expanded for individuals who need it, but also reduce the impact of the presence of marijuana in our communities by decriminalizing small amounts because it is such a burden on our law enforcement. So, thank you. Oh,
okay.
And one thing I would like to, am I allowed to ask Ms. Ford a question?
If you'd like to, sure, it's part of your
One thing that I find quite confusing and compelling, Ms. Ward, is that at one of the debate forums we were at, you said you did not believe in therapeutic cannabis at all because you could not justify as a nurse practitioner that it had zero side effects. So could you please clarify your point on that?
I have no problem with therapeutic use of cannabis. I don't think I ever said that I did.
And where at the candidate forum there were lots of witnesses.
Yeah, well, there were a lot
of
of things going on. It was hard to sort out exactly what the questions were. I have no problem with use of therapeutic use with cannabis.
Okay, thanks for the clarification.
Okay, thank you very much. Did either of you want to add anything else onto that question, or because you have a 30-second rebuttal coming back if you wanted to add anything onto that, or we can move on to the next question.
Move on to the next question.
Okay, very good. All right, we're going to move on to, right after marijuana, we're going to move on to guns. We have two questions surrounding firearms. Democratic State Representative Deborah Altschiller of Portsmouth in the 2018-2019 legislative session plans to introduce legislation authorizing law enforcement to forcibly disarm and confiscate firearms and ammunition from law-abiding citizens merely on the articulated suspicion by a friend, a family member, or a coworker that they are a danger to themselves or others. These are colloquially known as red flag laws. Do you believe that this sort of legislation, colloquially referred to as a red flag law, is a violation of the constitutionally protected right of due process? And Jennifer, you have first response to that question. 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. I'm a gun owner, so I've owned a gun for, 6-7 years. I have a shotgun and a rifle, and I use them for self-protection at our home. We live in a very rural area. I don't know the details of what this person has submitted. The way that it's framed, it sounds very intrusive, and I can't respond to the details of this because I don't know it, but I can certainly say that if it walks over somebody's due process, then that's not something that I would support, but I do think there's room for improvement for how we deal with individuals who have repeatedly shown that they are a mental health risk for violence. Because oftentimes what we've seen in these active shooter situations are individuals who have had a repeated history of violence, not just with themselves, but with others. So again, I don't know the full details of what this person has submitted, but yeah, that's my initial reaction to that.
We have 1.5 minutes left on your response, so I want to follow up to
Sure.
with a question directly to you. What are things that you think could possibly be done to address individuals who have had multiple either psychiatric visits, who have an extensive history of being treated by a psychiatrist, or who have an extensive history of being medicated for psychiatric conditions? What, if anything, would you propose could be done about those individuals and access to firearms by them?
Well, I think those individuals are the process for which we see these individuals with repeated hospitalizations, the repeated attempts to do things that are violent in nature. There is not enough support for individuals who surround these people who are struggling to have mental health support. So I think New Hampshire does a woefully inadequate job of funding mental health services to be able to track people who are going through these processes, to provide them the support that they need in order to deal with these critical issues. So I think we certainly have room to reevaluate how we provide mental health support for individuals who are experiencing these repeated violent and tracked and thank you, extreme violent outbursts. So
okay. Jennifer?
Strengthening mental health, basically.
Thank you. And Senator Ward, your response to that question, do you need me to repeat that, or do you have the question?
Talk about the red flagging.
Talking the red flag laws, do you believe that a red flag law is a violation of the constitutionally protected right of due process? 2.5 minutes.
I do believe it's in conflict with the Constitution. I think if we start red flagging people, we are going down a very slippery slope. Who is going to make these comments? I realize, and I agree with Ms. Alford-Teaster here, that probably in many cases it's a mental health issue. But I do not think that people generally should go and say, you know, such and such a person is at high risk, and I think that he's going to do something bad, so would you please take his guns away from him? I think that should be taken care of in court. And I think if something like that is adjudicated in the court, then I will go, that's okay. But have somebody having their guns confiscated because somebody has told the police that they think they're at risk, okay, I would be very, very careful. I think that's really going down the slippery slope.
And just a follow-up question to that, would you feel more comfortable, or would you support a air fingers quote red flag law if that red flag law had a built-in mechanism for relief? Say, for instance, that if the burden of proof, of course, were on the state or the law enforcement agency to prove that that person was a threat, if they were unable to make that proof within a reasonable period of time, say, for instance, 72 hours, including an automatic mechanism in that piece of legislation which would guarantee that individual their firearms and ammunition back without having to incur costly attorney's fees and legal fees seeking the return of those firearms?
I still think they were very, very risky, because I think that 72 hours, I think if you get your guns taken away from you, I'd be very surprised if you get them back, because there's always going to be somebody who's going to complain about it and carry it further. I think if this really is an issue, it should be adjudicated in the court.
Okay, Senator Ward, thank you very much. Jennifer, you have a 30-second rebuttal, if you'd like to use that.
Sure. So just to make sure that I understand what you're saying, that if law enforcement had come forward and be able to make that case within 72 hours, they would either be released and reimbursed for the time and given their guns, or they would, if they had the evidence, then there would be an intervention. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. I mean, according to due process,
Okay.
that the burden of proof is on the prosecution,
Yes.
not on, excuse me, not on the accused.
Yeah.
So given a reasonable period of time, say
Yes.
for instance 72 hours, for the case to be made that yes, this person does pose an exigent threat to the safety of themselves
Yeah.
or other people, and if that case is not made adequately in court within 72 hours, there would be an automatic mechanism built into the legislation that would guarantee that person's swift and speedy return of their firearms and ammunition.
That sounds like a reasonable attempt to try to mitigate when you have individuals who are repeatedly showing violent outbursts or tendencies. I think we do that in other circumstances as well, for individuals who are a harm to themselves or make explicit threats to other people. Law enforcement will come and do well checks, and if they deem in that moment that that individual is unsafe to themselves or other, they can involuntarily commit them to the state psychiatric hospital. So I think if there are provisions to be able to ensure that individuals who are being accused, simply just being accused, that they could have their firearms returned to them and the burden is on the state, I think that sounds fair.
Okay, thank you very much. And Senator Ward, you have the final 30-second rebuttal, if you'd like to use that.
I'm still very curious whether or not that actually would happen, that somebody had the gun taken away and in 72 hours they can have them back again, because who are you going to call on to defend your position that you have, that there's nothing wrong with you? Because I think a lot of times people will complain and they can bring something to the police, and that's it. it becomes very difficult to get your rights back, and I do think that you have a right.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Moving on to the next question involving AR-15s, the scary black rifles. Following a number of high-profile mass shootings over the past decade, the AR-15 has become the focal point for many seeking to implement, quote, common sense gun safety laws. Former congressional candidate Morris Sullivan recently posed with an AR-15 in a campaign television ad, implying that it was a weapon of war and calling for a ban on, quote, assault rifles and high-capacity magazines. This question goes to you first, Senator Ward. What are your thoughts on the AR-15 rifle? Do you believe that these are indeed weapons of war, or do they have an acceptable use for both hunting and sport shooting here in the state of New Hampshire?
I am not up on all the classifications of guns. We mentioned AR-15 at one point in another discussion, and the gentleman said he has an AR-15 and he uses for deer hunting. So I think maybe we're talking about a gun with an automatic rifle with a high capacity, in which case my understanding is that you need a federal license for that kind of a gun. And the license fee will be something like $125. And very few people will actually go out and get it. So I think it all depends on the capacity of the gun and whether or not it actually is a semi-automatic or whether it's just a gun that has that you can use for deer hunting.
So for clarification purposes, would you support any type of restrictions on any type of sporting rifles or hunting rifles based on aesthetics or based on perhaps ammunition capacity?
No, I don't. I think that people should be able to have the gun of their choice, and I really have no problem with it. New Hampshire is probably one of the safest states when it comes to guns and when it comes to violence with guns. And I would have no problem having people have the gun that they want to have.
Senator Ward, thank you very much. Jennifer, your response, 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you. So Morris Sullivan is a veteran. She understands the power of those weapons, and she would not be making that case against the common use and ownership of those weapons if she did not understand the destructive nature of them. I agree with her. As a veteran, she understands better than anybody what that weapon can do to people. I think when it comes to, slicing and dicing the type of availability of weapons for individuals, I think it makes sense to keep weapons like that out of the hands of normal, regular, citizens, because those are weapons of war. And I can say, as somebody who has worked in emergency preparedness, my father-in-law is a corrections officer, and the amount of training that goes into making sure that you can use those guns responsibly is a lot of effort. I mean, I just think that responsible use of these firearms makes sense, but what's ending up happening is because we don't have any sort of ability to track or legislate how these guns are getting into people's hands, we are having these horrible tragedies across the United States. I was in an active shooter situation last year. I can tell you that when you're in those circumstances, it's terrifying. And this person, mentally ill, had a gun, walked into my place of business and killed somebody upstairs from me. If that person had been, appropriately treated, approached, his mother may have survived, and the rest of us may not have, suffered the emotional tragedy of being fearful into your place of work every time you come in there, because I still, to this day, make sure I check every exit when I walk into that building. And one thing that I find particularly tragic about this is there are children who walk into their school districts every day worried about this. And this is something that needs to change. And I think these attempts to explore ways in which we can control these large capacity weapons makes sense. Working with other people, working with the people who are interested in utilizing these guns to find a way that it makes it fair for access makes sense to me. Individuals who have law enforcement background, that makes sense to me. Hunting a deer with an AR-15 does not make sense to me. As somebody who has grown up in New Hampshire and has known a lot of deer hunters and has enjoyed deer meat at one point in my life, I'm a vegetarian now, I could tell you it is not necessary to have a gun like that in order to kill a deer. So, thank you.
So just point of clarification,
Yeah.
So you would support banning certain types of firearms?
I am in support of exploring ways in which we can reduce the impact of how many people get killed in some of these active shooter situations. So while Ms. Ward says that we are the safest state in the country and that we are very low gun violence, as a person who has experienced gun violence in my place of work, it's not, and has worked in emergency management for years, I can tell you that it's a matter of time before that happens to a public place that you're in. So we should explore all options.
Okay, thank you very much. Senator Ward, your 30-second rebuttal, please.
I still say that New Hampshire is very safe. And if the AR-15 that this gentleman told me about, he used it for deer hunting, so be it. I think that you can have high-capacity weapons. My understanding, again, is if you have, and becomes a federal issue, you have to have a heavy background check, fingerprinting, the whole works, to be sure that you are eligible to use this kind of a weapon.
Okay, thank you very much. And Jennifer, your final 30-second rebuttal, if you'd like to use it.
I just would like to reiterate that I'm a gun owner and I've grown up in this state, and I can tell you that most gun owners are pretty reasonable and want to do right by their communities, and they also are interested in protecting children too. So essentializing this debate to whether or not we restrain people from having certain types of guns as a way to drive a partisan wedge between us is not fair. We have a crisis in this country. This crisis is affecting the health and safety of children, and we should be exploring ways in which we can increase the safety for individuals in this state and in this country.
Thank you. And I'd like to ask a 60-second follow-up question to that. One of the first acts that Governor Chris Sununu took upon being inaugurated as governor of the state of New Hampshire was to sign the open carry bill, celebrated by some and lamented by others. And I'm going to ask you first, since Senator Ward went with the first question. Would you advocate for, or would you work towards a repeal of Senate Bill 12, repealing the constitutional carry or the open carry and going back to a strict concealed weapons permit only ability to carry firearms?
I think the presence of an open carry permit essentially creates a sentiment that, you know, if we're a very safe state, why do we need to have open carry law in New Hampshire? I mean, to me, what the fact that that was the very first bill that Governor Sununu passed tells me is that he's wildly out of touch with the economic needs of individuals in our state, if that's the very first thing that he passed.
Well, I said one of the first.
Yeah, well, exactly. One of the first bills that he passed had to do with dealing with an issue that is not really an issue. I mean, people are allowed to have access to their guns, but there are people out there that I'm meeting, that lots and lots of people, thousands of people I have met in Senate District 8 who have real and pressing economic needs that are not being addressed in the current legislature. So for me, my priorities will exist around addressing some of those needs. So that's how I feel.
Okay, Jennifer, thank you.
Excited.
Senator Ward, your response, 60 seconds, please.
Well, which bill he signs first has nothing to do with the other bills that happen to be around. It has to do with which bill it gets out of commission first, which bill gets out of both House and the Senate and is ready for the signature. I'm very proud of having supported the concealed carry. My feeling is that you can carry a weapon, you can carry a firearm in the open. The minute you put a coat on, if it's cold outside, you have to have a permit in order to do this. Mm-hmm. And I think that makes no sense whatsoever. If you have, and I have a concealed carry permit, I don't need it, but I mean it should be there.
Okay. In fairness, I can give you a 30-second rebuttal if you'd like.
That'd be great.
Okay.
One of the things that I found really compelling about our debate last week is that right before the lead up to the debate, many strangers were telling me about how a very uncomfortable exchange that existed from an existing House rep and the would-be candidates that were up there, flashing his gun at people, using it as an intimidation. So I worry about legislation like that enabling individuals who are not really very safe to further feel justified in wielding weapons as a means to intimidate people.
Okay, and you're referring to, and I just want to clarify, you're referring to State Representative J.J. Valera,
yes,
who drew back his jacket to expose an otherwise lawfully possessed firearm at the League of Women Voters candidates forum in Antrim.
Yes, with the intention of intimidating the two House rep candidates that were sitting there. Many of the individuals who came for the debate between Ms. Ward and myself had come up to express deep concern to me about the way that gentleman was expressing his rights as a means to intimidate not just the candidates but the audience. So this was why when we were chatting last week, we were working very hard to be very collegial to reassure people that we are much more civilized than that. Ms. Ward has never shown her firearm to me.
So there won't be any gun flashing.
I really
here this evening,
appreciate
right?
that.
Okay. And Senator Ward, your 30-second rebuttal, if you'd like.
Anybody who knows J.J. Valera knows that he is a show-off. And I mean, he can do that, and I would not have slightest concern. He just shows that he carries a gun. He carries a gun all the time. And by removing his jacket or opening it up, just tells you that he has a gun, and it's concealed, which is perfectly legal according to SB 12, which I supported.
Okay. Ladies, thank you very much. All right, Jennifer, you're going to get first response on this question. Earlier, you had mentioned expressing concern about Governor Sununu signing Senate Bill 12 into law first. You had said something to the effect of that he was fiscally out of touch with the residents of the state of New Hampshire. So the next question deals with money, specifically income taxes and sales taxes. I'm not going to preface this with a statement. I'm just going to ask directly, under what circumstances would you support the implementation of a sales tax or an income tax, or both, on the residents of the state of New Hampshire? 2.5 minutes.
Thank you for this opportunity to clarify this, because there's been a lot of mailers that have been sent out on my behalf incorrectly stating that I'm in favor of an income tax and a sales tax. That's just not true. I'm not. Because if you look at the polling data for the state of New Hampshire, and as somebody who has grown up here, a wage income tax is wildly unpopular for both sides of the party. If you were looking at just Democrats alone, 80% of Democrats don't even want an income tax, a wage income tax, because we do have other income tax like dividends and interest and capital gains. But when it comes to a sales tax, a broad-based sales tax could be punitive for individuals who are living on low income or fixed incomes. There have been some constituents who have told me that they are in favor of a sin tax on cigarettes and alcohol. But one of the other arguments against that I've heard from individuals is that they feel like that would be punitive to lower income individuals as well. So to set the record straight, I am not in favor of an income tax or a broad-based sales tax.
Are there any types of taxes, just a quick follow-up since we have about a minute and a half left, are there any taxes that you would be in favor of imposing?
Well, my message on my campaign, and this stands true, is to stop the downshifting of taxes onto local property tax owners. I have talked to so many people who are living on a fixed income, who are thinking about how many years they have left in their house that they can stay there as a retired individual because they cannot keep up with property taxes. And some of the legislation that my opponent has pushed and is supportive still will continue to push property taxes down onto individuals with fixed incomes. And where that's problematic is we pit folks who are living on a fixed income against children, because a lot of those property taxes end up going to the local school district because it's not fairly funded. So my interest is to help protect people from having the increase of the property taxes, because it's unfair. We have unfairly funded public education system. So my interest in getting to the State House and serving people is reflective of the need that I see, and that means helping people alleviate the tax burden that they're experiencing.
Okay, thank you. Senator Ward, your response, 2.5 minutes, please.
Well, New Hampshire is known for no income tax, no sales tax. It's something that I think we are very proud of. We talk about there are other things that are being taxed, like liquor is being taxed, cigarettes are being taxed. When you buy a house or sell a house, there is a transfer tax, there's a stamp tax. There are a lot of sort of hidden taxes that we sometimes forget about and more concentrate on the property tax, which you all know goes right to the to support the school in that particular community. There are ways. Well, if you think about the school and the taxes to the school, it comes mostly from the property tax and the state aid. And the state aid goes to the school for each child. In addition, you have all kinds of other money from the state depending on the situation of the child, whether it's an IEP or whether it's a disabled child, whether they can afford to have lunch at home or not, extra money that comes from the state to support that child in the school. My Ms. Teaster, Alford-Teaster here says that that gets downshifted to the property taxes. But if you are not going to have an income tax or a sales tax, and you want to get rid or lower the property tax, where is the money coming from? And that's a question that I have.
Okay, thank you. Jennifer, your 30-second rebuttal.
Thank you. Yes, so in 2010, corporations who are headquartered out of New Hampshire received tax breaks that they did not ask for, with the assumption that they would create jobs here. Well, we already have a job worker shortage. These tax breaks, when these corporations came to the Senate Finance Committee, what they asked for were workers, not tax cuts. That money left the state, and then it increased property taxes in the state to the tune of $110 million. So for me, a fairly funded tax system makes more sense, and making sure that corporations that are not headquartered here, I'm not talking about small businesses either, because they are the backbone of our Main Street in New Hampshire. But when we're talking about giving corporate giveaways to businesses that are not headquartered here, that does not make sense. Those types of taxing structures are what create a disproportionate burden on individuals who are living on a fixed income, which are largely the demographic that we have in our district.
Okay.
Sorry, thank you, Keith.
That's okay. I'm going to give Senator Ward, because she has the final rebuttal, so since you took 60 seconds, I'm going to give her 60 seconds if she'd like to utilize that. Senator Ward, your rebuttal, 60 seconds.
Well, talking about the lowering of taxes for the businesses. Any business who files a New Hampshire income tax declaration got the tax cut. So it is not necessarily for the richest corporations. It went to everyone who filed a tax return. So that takes care of that. Right now, Massachusetts has lowered its business taxes. Maine is looking into lowering the business taxes. New York has lowered the business taxes. So you have New Hampshire sitting sort of right in the middle of it. And if we don't do something with our business taxes, we are not going to have any businesses coming to New Hampshire to work here and to employ people. It's true that we have more jobs here than we have workers. That's true, and we are working on that. We have workforce development, and we need to do something more for that.
Okay, thank you very much. And I want to just throw one additional question out here before we get into the questions for each other. 60 seconds, there's not going to be a rebuttal on this, and I'm going to throw this out to Senator Ward first. The state motto, live free or die. What does that mean to you?
That means I can live without too many regulations. I can make my own decisions. I'm not going to have the government tell me what I can do, when I can do it, and how I'm going to do it.
Very good. Thank you. Jennifer?
Well, I'm a native Granite Stater, so I appreciate you bringing that up, because I grew up here. I grew up on the seacoast. I live in Sutton. I am somebody who is devoted to Granite State. I moved back here after working my way out of poverty because I wanted to contribute myself and my talents to the state that I love very much. While I wholeheartedly and theoretically agree with the sentiments that Ms. Ward has stated, we also have to exist in a society that has rules and laws that we all have to abide by. We all drove here in a car. We have to stay on the roads. So to say that just sweepingly, that somehow government's not going to interfere in our daily lives, is just disingenuous. I would state that to live free or die means that you are able to reach your potential in a context that supports you at all stages of your life. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, we are going to move on to the candidate questions. This is an opportunity for you to ask a question of your opponent. And how it was determined previously that, Jennifer, you're going to have the first question.
Great.
So you will have 60 seconds to ask your question of Senator Ward. She will have 2 minutes to reply. And then she will have a 60-second opportunity to ask you a question. You will have 2 minutes to reply. Sound fair?
Thank you.
Okay, very good. So, Jennifer, you may go first with your question. 60 seconds, please.
Thank you. Thank you for being here. And thank you for working through this with me. One question I have for you that's sort of been persistent with me is, you're a former nurse practitioner, and I work in the medical field. And one thing that I've found really confusing about how you justify not supporting paid family medical leave, because it's, popular with 80% of New Hampshireites, as somebody who has been with patients and seen the struggles that they've gone through, I don't understand how you could not support paid family medical leave and the protections for pre-existing conditions. As somebody who's been a former clinician, I would think that you would understand how these things, these basic protections for working families, keep them in the workforce. Can you clarify that?
Thank you for the question. Yes, I can very easily explain my position on that. Paid family leave, the bill that came through, was based on a small sample in I believe, Dover, New Hampshire. It was not a sample with all kinds of people from New Hampshire were involved in it. The bill was based on the laws in 4 states who had mandated insurance for family leave. The author of those bills had said, please don't use that for New Hampshire, because in New Hampshire it was going to be voluntary. So those are 2 huge things. The paid family leave, I'm very sympathetic to the concept of paid family leave. That I have no problem with that. My position is that that is something that should be, it is an insurance. And person who wants to have paid family leave should arrange with an insurance company. And I can tell you right now that we have somebody working from the Republican Senate, working with the governor, talking to insurance companies, talking to labor unions, talking to other people interested to find out, is there any way that we can make a paid family leave insurance that is voluntary, that is not affecting everybody else in New Hampshire that has to put money in and pay for it.
Okay, thank you very much. Would you like to, we have about 30 seconds left on that. Do you want to ask a follow-up question quickly?
Sure.
Okay.
One additional question. So how do you speak to the seniors that I have met, the countless seniors that I have met who are living in housing insecurity because of their property taxes? How do you speak to alleviating their concerns?
So we're switching. You're not doing family leave anymore. Do you have a different
Well, we were
question?
asked for
that was a follow-up question. So if you want to use that as a follow-up question, you can certainly answer that.
Yeah, I'd like her to answer that question. Because I've met several people, many people who I canvassed who have cried to me about how scared they are about losing a home they've been in for 50 years. I'd really like to know what you would say to them. And if you'd like to meet them, I'd be happy to take you to their house because I remember where they are because I've brought them information to help alleviate their circumstance.
I appreciate your willingness to share.
I am.
I guess you and I must be meeting very different people. I have done a tremendous amount of knocking on doors and talking to people. I have not seen anybody crying on my shoulder that they can't afford anything. Our seniors, I think, generally are doing quite well. Seniors, like any other part of the state population, there are seniors that are going to have problems, that don't have enough money. That's true. As well as there are families that don't have enough money. But I think we have enough safety net in place that if that senior gets help and can find out where they can get help to pay off their mortgage or help them with their food, it is available. And I think it is to me, it's a disservice to say that there are so many people with housing insecurity, with food insecurity, with healthcare insecurity. Those things are there. Yes, there are some that fall through the net, but on the whole, there are a lot of things in place to take care of those people. Well, we disagree on it.
I'm asking you specifically about alleviating their tax burden, which they have specifically told me is what is preventing them from staying in homes they've either had for 40 or 50 years or multi-generationally. I want you to speak to those voters because those are the ones who I'm worried about. Those are the ones that I'm scared for, that they cry to me, and I am not exaggerating this. I see this almost every time I'm at a door. I want you to speak to those people.
I think I just said that there are a lot of help.
But the tax burden, that's what they care about.
Tax burden, most towns, if you go to the town, you can ask for a relief of taxes. You can actually go to the select board and ask.
So instead of reducing their property tax burden by stopping the downshifting of taxes, you're suggesting that we should just do case by case. Is that what you're suggesting?
I think we should do case by case. Because I think there are an awful lot of people who probably have more than what they'll let you know. But that's,
Okay.
we differ.
You're breaking my heart.
We differ.
Okay.
I would love to take you out canvassing with me. I would
have
love
enough
that.
canvassing to do on my
All right,
own.
we have one more candidate question. So, Senator Ward, you have the opportunity to ask a question to Jennifer Alford-Teaster. 60 seconds for your question, and then Jennifer, you'll have 2 minutes to respond.
Thank you.
And then we'll give the rebuttal opportunity. Senator Ward, your question, please.
We have met each other a couple of times now during these debates, and I have heard that you're looking forward to doing the work of the Senate.
Yeah.
I also have heard that you have a 3-year-old at home, you have a full-time job, and from my perspective, to be in the Senate is pretty much a full-time job.
Yeah.
I like to know, how are you going to juggle a full-time job, home life, your other responsibilities, and essentially a full-time job in the Senate?
That's a wonderful question, and I'm so glad you asked.
Good.
So,
Glad you-
I am a very hard worker. I actually am going to work part-time at the college because that is my sacrifice, to take a pay cut to do this work, to advocate, passionately advocate for those working families who are struggling. Because I know what it's like to struggle day to day. I know what food insecurity feels like. I know exactly what housing insecurity feels like. I'm paying a mortgage, I pay for childcare, and I can passionately advocate for those things for individuals at the State House. I have earned the privilege, because I am such a hard worker, to be able to do that through the college, to work half-time. And I also would like to remind you that I put myself through my first degree working 3 jobs. I do not have a problem with hard work. In fact, I intend to use my drive and my enthusiasm to make sure that the state of New Hampshire works for everybody, not just a select few who we deem morally appropriate.
Senator Ward, would you like to respond?
I don't know what there is to respond. Obviously, Ms. Alford-Teaster, just because you have been a hard worker, that's nice. I like to hear that. But on the other hand, for some of these programs that you are advocating for, I still like to know from you, how are you going to pay for them?
I'm sorry, can you be explicit what you're talking about? Which ones in particular? What programs have I said I'm going to
You're
push?
talking about that the state is downshifting.
Yes,
Okay.
that's true.
Okay,
That's
if
a
you're
fact.
downshifting and you want to have tax relief for these people who no longer can pay for their mortgage or for their taxes to the town, who picks up the tab?
First of all, I would like to state that there is an element of human dignity for individuals who have worked 40 and 50 years in their communities, that they should be able to have the right that we would have these discussions to help alleviate their burden, because they have done the hard work of contributing to their communities for 40 and 50 years. If the idea is to celebrate people who work hard, then we should be looking out for them when they're thinking about retiring. But you know what I'm hearing instead? Individuals who should be thinking about retirement are thinking about adding a 3rd job, because they can't keep up with their health costs, they can't keep up with their mortgages, and I think that is a terrible tragedy on behalf of human dignity. So I think instead of questioning me about why that's a justified pursuit to protect working families, I think as you're the sitting senator who's been in there for 2 years and has not worked to alleviate this burden, that's why I'm hearing those stories. They're real. I'm happy to take you out there. And I think based off of what I'm seeing, there is a strong and desperate need for individuals to see relief. When we give corporations who are not headquartered in New Hampshire a tax cut that they did not ask for, we are doing a disservice to the native Granite Staters who are here now who need that relief.
Okay. We could, I would love to have an opportunity to go on for hours, because we could
Me
get
too.
very, very spirited with this. Unfortunately, we are drawing
Passion, it's
tight
passion.
on time. So the closing statements, Senator Ward, you have the first closing statement, 2 minutes, and then Jennifer Alford-Teaster, you will follow up with your 2-minute closing statement. Senator Ward, your closing statement, please, 2 minutes.
Thank you. I'm still Ruth Ward. I still live in Stoddard, and I have just spent almost 2 years working in the Senate. I have enjoyed the whole process. It has been an incredibly steep learning curve, and I have learned things that I didn't think I needed to know. It has been very gratifying working with the other senators to work on bills that will make a difference in people's lives. For example, we have the full-time kindergarten, which was a huge thing for a lot of the schools, for a lot of the families who need to have the child in school so they can work. We worked and set aside money for scholarships for the students who go to the New Hampshire state colleges. We gave money to the schools to make their environment safer. We provided significant relief for municipalities for their infrastructure, in this particular case for road and for bridge repair. A lot of the towns received thousands of dollars, some up top, depending on who the town was. The amount was different, it was not the same amount to all the towns. We have done a lot, but I have to say there is much more to be done. We have looked into a lot of things. The whole retirement system needs to be overhauled, and we are aware of it, and we are working on it. And when the November 6th comes, I really ask humbly for your support so I can continue the work that I have started in the Senate. Thank you very much.
Senator Ward, thank you very much. Jennifer Alford-Teaster, your closing statement, please. 2 minutes.
Thank you. So one of the things I take great pride in is the thousands of people that I have met over the canvassing experience, the door knocking and meeting with people at committees. One of the things that has been increasingly powerful to me and motivating to me is there is truly a tale of two New Hampshires here. There's the tale that people are doing great, just don't look behind the curtains. But you look behind the curtains and you see people who are struggling to make ends meet, struggling to worry how they're going to pay for their child's education when it comes to state tuition. There are people who are worried about paying for their health care. I knocked a door on Saturday where this gentleman, Trump supporter, right? You'd think we wouldn't have anything in common. But one of the things I really enjoy is talking to people and seeing what leads them to have these passionate beliefs. And we were talking for about 30 minutes, and then he reveals to me that he has a very rare blood-borne cancer, and he is faced with losing his house when he's not even sure he's going to live until next year. And he looked at my face and he said, "Who's looking out for me?" And I said, "Well, you could have had paid family medical leave. So you could have had 6 weeks of paid leave so you wouldn't have to take a cut in your mortgage to then maybe pay it back next year when you're able to get back to work." So I see you out there, I care about you, and I'm going to work really hard to make sure that your stories are brought to the Senate floor so that you know that you're looked after. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Senator Ruth Ward and Jennifer Alford-Teaster, I want to thank both of you for coming out this evening. It's been a great discussion. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you very much for your candid and honest answers. And again, I would like to extend a warm thank you to the Sunapee Middle High School for providing us this fantastic room where we had the opportunity to hear from both of you. And a reminder, please, on Tuesday, November 6th, get out and vote. Have a great night, everybody. God bless.